He goes on to say that the prince's unilateral response notwithstanding, the timing of the Hussey controversy couldn't have been worse for William and Kate. The story broke out on the morning that the Waleses were preparing to leave for the United States to roll out the green carpet for the Earthshot prize ceremony in Boston. Oh man, okay, so now we're going to get to the part of the chapter where he goes to great lengths to let you know that William and Catherine just can't seem to put a foot right. You know, all their, little glitz and glamour comes to naught because all their causes are stupid and lame, and everyone thinks they're boring. So. And I'm just over here like, am I watching different news than you? Because I do not remember this event being some kind of big, embarrassing faux pas for them. That they would show up here and that everyone was like, crickets, no one cares. After William Wadley announced Earthshot to the world, sources claim Charles was quietly annoyed. For much of his adult life, he was the one who passionately pushed the environmental cause, often without any acknowledgement. He had hoped that William would want to involve his father or at least credit him for inspiring him to take on this role, but instead, it was as if Charles' environmentalism didn't even exist, said a Clarence House source at the time. A glitzy affair for a good cause, the inaugural Earthshot ceremony in London generated a fair share of buzz. The following year's event was shaping up to be no different, featuring celebrity guests. But by the time they landed in Boston, the furor over Lady Susan was at full volume, drowning out much of the hoopla for the event. The couple flew commercial to make a point, but it was lost on the public already outraged by yet another royal race incident. Who is this public that they're referring to who is outraged? I'm part of the public. I wasn't outraged. I was super excited when William and Kate came. I mean, I guess super excited is a little bit of an overstatement. I wasn't going to see them. But I thought it was nice that they came to the country, and it's interesting to see what she's going to wear. And, everybody likes it when they come. Everyone. There's no American out there that was like, not those ratty racists. We got our own problems with race. We don't need their problems too. Nobody thought that. And I just think that this is how people feel about William and Catherine in America. They either don't care because it's not our royals, or they think they're a nice couple. That's it. I don't think that there's not like one person over here harboring great disdain. But Scobie says that important people such as John Kerry and Carolyn Kennedy appeared to tap the brakes on joining the engagement since they didn't want to have to sit around with a bunch of racists. Kerry cited illness and Kennedy said that she had disrupted travel plans. But in reality, it's likely they both wanted to see how the scandal would play out. Of course, in the end, Kerry did attend the event, and Prince William later met with Kennedy for 30 minutes. On the second night, William and Kate attended a Celtics basketball game, where, to their surprise, many fans booed and subjected the royal couple to chants of USA, USA, whenever they appeared on the Jumbotron. Really? Well, at least Scobie says that in all fairness, Boston sports fans will boo just about anyone who shows up on their turf, but the latest scandal, along with all the other baggage William and Kate drag around as royals, including their treatment of Harry and Meghan for one, only made the jeers louder. In fact, there appeared to be little excitement for the royal visit in general, especially compared to the huge cheers I witnessed when traveling with the couple to New York in 2014. When asked what it was like having the royals courtside, Celtics coach Joe Mazzulla reportedly said, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph?" before joking that he was familiar with only one royal family and didn't know too much about the British one. Thank you. All right, well, to cite Joe Mazzulla as, the voice of America is to be way off. Joe's always saying things that are sort of like very original to him. I think he's really funny. I always enjoy when he is being interviewed, but he doesn't say things that are necessarily descriptive of how everybody feels. That is that was why that was such a soundbite, because that was such a random thing to say. And, it's just him. It's his personality. It's his sense of humor. But to make matters worse, there was a halftime show entertainment courtesy of another royal couple. The first trailer for the Sussexes' intimate Netflix docuseries, Harry and Meghan, released that same day, an international move by the streamer, I'm told, promising the, quote, full truth behind the couple's departure. There's a hierarchy of the family, Harry said in a clip. There's leaking, but there's also planting of stories. It was all anyone could talk about. But isn't that ironic that Harry would say that in the clip, that there's planting of stories, when the docuseries was first advertised the same week that his brother and his brother's wife were in the country? It just seems to me that how in the world can you point a finger and be like, the institution is just riddled with all sorts of planning and scheming, when he himself, in this very move, is very evidently planning and scheming against his own brother. But what of the Earthshot ceremonies? How did that actually work out? He says that in the United Kingdom, newspapers claim that the public switched off in droves within minutes of the BBC airing it, while the audience watched live in the United States via PBS streaming platform, and it fell to hundreds at times. And it was a bad look because certain celebrities flew in on private jets, David Beckham being one of them, and that the people receiving the environmental awards were left to stay at home, and they just appeared on Zoom, which is kind of a bad look. Then he wants to say that rather than buying a new outfit, Kate made a statement by renting her off-the-shoulder gown. Genuinely good idea, but she's like never done it again. So, what does it matter that she did something good one time? Of all the people he could criticize about their wardrobe and being more financially conscious about spending money on clothes, Catherine is not the one to come after. Because she has repeatedly had outfits and dresses remade so she could wear them again for other events. That's like a well-known thing about her. And she is never trying to upstage anybody in her dress. If she goes to somebody's wedding, she always wears something she's worn before, so no one's paying any attention to her. And for him to act like this is a one-off, but she's generally just spending like a drunken sailor, what in the world? He also wants to criticize the fact that the green carpet that they walked on was reused from the previous year. But, don't be too excited about that environmental do-goodery because they shipped that green carpet all the way from England. So that probably cost a lot of money. Then he says that after this whole debacle, for the first time in their lives, William and Kate now had to deal with image challenges of their own. What is he talking about? So he wants to tell me that Catherine never had any bad press when she was dating William? Everyone's calling her Weighty Katie and making fun of her and acting like she's this clingers-on, which of course she wasn't. But for him to act like this is the first time anyone has ever criticized them for everything, and then he goes on to paint this really ridiculous picture of the both of them that, she's just this popular fairy tale figure. Everybody just likes her because she's just like this, poor little Cinderella character who came from obscurity and married a prince. And that William, up until this point, has always seemed like this, aware and vigorous young guy who is just going to really inject new life into this stodgy institution he's a part of. But that now everyone's realizing that maybe they're not so exciting after all. And that the Waleses are finally facing more scrutiny from sections of the press and public, now unleashed from their respectful relationship with the Queen. So William and Catherine should expect everyone to turn on them because that's basically what they deserve. They're just the same thing as everybody else in the institution. They've just been able to manage to hide it longer. In case you aren't done with this guy's sour attitude yet, he's about to stick a whole lemon in your mouth. You know what Scobie is? He is the human equivalent of stepping on a Lego in the dark. He's just so maddening. He is without equal. He goes on to say that it's not like things were going that well for the firm before the Queen's death. That's literally a sentence. Like, the cattiness is literally there. He has italicized the word that. So you're literally supposed to read it like this. It's not like things were going that well for the firm before the Queen's death. After Harry and Meghan shared stories of problematic behavior and made some damning allegations, and Prince Andrew's slow-motion fall from grace plunged the family into turmoil, the palace was in frazzled damage control mode, and Charles, thanks to his plethora of money-related scandals, Scobie's never going to explain what that means, and doing little right, even for the usually unscathed William and Kate, their disastrous 8-day Caribbean tour through Commonwealth countries, Jamaica, Belize, and the Bahamas, in late January 2022 for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, put them firmly in the firing line. What should have been a simple smile-for-the-camera trip turned into a PR nightmare for Kensington Palace, and instead of solidifying the monarchy's presence in the Commonwealth realms, the tour ended up raising new questions about its future. So then we got to get into the dregs of this conversation. Look, I think that it is true that this Caribbean tour was not met with a lot of understanding. I think that it was just a really bad time for them to take that trip, just because the public conversation, since we can't have individual personalities anymore, and we're just this mask that goes around like a hive, all bleeding out the same phrases. We were all talking about racism at the same time, and we're all talking about colonialism at the same time. So for them to go to these former colonies and take pictures with these people who clearly did not want them to be there, it was a bad look, but one that they weren't prepped for, and one that William apparently was very upset that they weren't better prepped for. Apparently, before they even got there, there had been protestations about their visit. They were really walked into the line of fire without any kind of a shield. Scobie says that prior to the visit, there was a publication written by the Advocates Network, which was addressed to the royal family and said, during her 70 years on the throne, your grandmother has done nothing to redress and atone for the suffering of our ancestors that took place during her reign and or during the entire period of British trafficking of Africans, enslavement, indentureship, and colonialization. We encourage you to act accordingly and just say you're sorry. The letter continued and called for reparations. So that was the kind of situation they were walking into, and it seems strange to me that they could be walking into such a hot zone of distrust and not be properly prepared. And I've said this in other books I've read as well. I think that the palace doesn't do a very good job testing the temperature, which they could easily do by just reading Twitter a little more often than they do. I think that I don't know exactly how they plan for these events, but I got this feeling when I was reading Tom Bower's book too, that there's a lot of times they walk into things where it's like, but you could have figured this out before, and so I do agree with Omid that sometimes it feels like they're on their back foot. I don't think that they are very good at predicting the temperature. So I'm not saying they actually have to change anything they're doing. I'm just saying that they need to be aware that people have their problems. Instead of just being like, I think people have problems. Okay, but figure out what the problem is and then address it appropriately. But one thing you never have to do is acquiesce to the accusations. So I'm not saying become aware of the accusations so that you can apologize for them, but rather become aware of the allegation so that you can then carry yourself in a way that makes that allegation no longer true, right? Don't apologize for it, but just, if there's any truth to it, then take the truth on and change things. But if there's no truth to it, then prove that there's no truth to it through your actions. And maybe even come out and be like, that's bogus. Sometimes I think that never explain, never complain only works when there is no internet involvement. But then when the internet is involved and the media has become so loud, I just think that that's no longer a strategy that will work in this day and age. Okay, well, the book goes on to say that instead of acknowledging the grievances, William and the palace chose to ignore it all. He says, I was just one of the few journalists who initially challenged the silence, pointing out the arrogance of flying into a country that had been colonized by Britain and the royal family, yet again refusing to engage in conversation about it. Photos of William and Kate in Trenchtown, clutching the hands of young black boys and girls through a fence that bore an unfortunate likeness to a cage, set the tone for the rest of the trip. At best, it was an unfortunate snapshot. At its worst, it was proof that all the white and undiverse palace team was just not equipped to carry out such engagements. I will never get behind any human being who wants to point out somebody's flaw, starting with the fact that they are white. You've lost me on that. You've lost me. You are racist. If you are going to use somebody's color against them in any conceivable way, you've lost the argument. You don't have one. If you did, and that's your best point, sit down. The book goes on to say the Kensington Palace explained themselves by saying that if you had been there, it wouldn't have been as obvious that this was an entirely inappropriate visual to be sending out to the world in regards to that photograph. Said the couple wanted to meet as many people as possible and not ignore anybody. And of course, Omid wants to interject himself and says that he suggested that it would have been avoided entirely if the couple's team included people of color, or those with more sensitivity to what would be appropriate and what wouldn't. Maybe, they replied quietly. See, that doesn't work though, because nobody knows who the team is that is behind William and Kate. They're the faces front and center. They can't change the color of their skin. So just because they had somebody with darker skin talking to them about what they should or shouldn't do, is that really going to change anything? This was the trip that they had agreed to take. It's not like they just showed up and there was no agenda. This trip had been planned. There had been people who had gone on before. The book says that the trip was organized months in advance, and all movements were determined by an earlier reconnaissance visit, led by members of William's team in the British Foreign Office. Even though the whole scene was drawn up and presented to the palace officials and the couple, no one found that the staging of the pair standing in an old Land Rover to recreate imagery of colonial-era trips made by the Queen and Prince Philip was a bad idea. The move, which saw the couple in all white on a raised platform waving at the all-black crowds below, was greeted with horror and widely mocked. Only after the world reacted to the photos did those around the couple attempt to distance themselves from the decision. There were questions, including from William, about whether it was appropriate, admitted a Kensington Palace source. The staging was all at the request of the Jamaican government, not the palace. They were keen to include the Land Rover, which had been kept for moments like this, but absolutely, we should have pushed back. Omid says that a spokesperson at the office of the Prime Minister in Jamaica said that that story doesn't sound true to them. I'm like, was it a spokesperson or an intern? Because somebody would have an answer for that. But Kensington Palace says that they were just excited about the itinerary initially and that there were no complaints and no hesitation. Well, you know what I think? I think that William having hesitations about whether this was appropriate, that rings true to me. Because if any of this is to be believed, he is the one who seems to have some idea about what the public wants from them. And he seems to have some idea of what would and would not be appropriate. See, this is what I'm saying when I said you don't need to apologize for things, but you need to make sure that your behavior does not indict you. If prior to their visit you have people writing open letters about how you and your compatriots have spent time colonializing and enslaving them, maybe you don't come and stage a picture that makes you look like a colonizer, because you aren't one. They're part of the Commonwealth now. It's not a colony anymore. So to ever get yourself in a situation where you are dressing up as the very thing they accused you of, that's bad. And yeah, there definitely should have been pushback. Just because somebody's like, well, we have this old car we'd like you to use. Okay, well, that's not good enough, because there's a letter right over here, that people are screaming about the former colonization. So let's not act like we are looking back on the old days. Then they are met with the horrific manners of this individual named Andrew Holness, who was Jamaica's prime minister. And he, to their very faces, said that Jamaica was moving on and ready to remove the Queen as head of state. And William and Catherine couldn't do anything but stand there awkwardly and say little in response. But later that evening, William said that he was frustrated and irritated that he'd been so unprepared for the moment. So far, everything about the trip looked like a throwback to a bygone era of the British Empire. Had this have been a personal tour, the itinerary would have been different. But this was a trip for the Platinum Jubilee, and we had little to say in how it looked, said Kensington Palace. So, I mean, the whole thing, I'm not going to stand by here and be like, well, nobody should have been offended by this. I don't think people should have been offended, but I do think that the palace messed up in the fact that people are already angry about a thing, so don't play into their anger. Avoid it, because then it's just going to be all these people being like, see, we told you, look at them standing in their white in that Land Rover, look at them. Well, to wrap up their Caribbean visit, William released a statement after coming home and realizing that things had gone very poorly in the estimation of the world. He said, "You learn so much on foreign visits. I know," he added, "that this tour has brought into even sharper focus questions about the past and the future. In Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas, the future is for the people to decide upon." His words certainly cooled some of the coverage, but it was too late to save it. This tour was already marred by ignorant slip-ups, mistakes, and indelible images that those in the Commonwealth still haven't forgotten, as many realms continue to power forth with their plans for true independence. What I don't understand, though, is why William is receiving so much of the backlash, because he didn't plan the trip. He wasn't over here deciding that he was going to stand in that Jeep. He wasn't over here saying we're going to go visit these people and those people and that the setup is going to be where I'm having to meet them from behind a fence. That wasn't his plan. Why isn't anybody mad at the Jamaican government who was working hand in glove with the British for this entire itinerary? It isn't as though the British just showed up and said, this is what we're doing. They were working with people. So why aren't any of the people of those countries turning on their own government saying, why didn't you create a better spectacle for us? Why was this what you chose to do? Do you want to keep us enslaved? I mean, if they're so sure that colonization is the thing that the British are still just foaming at the mouth for, then why wouldn't they be mad at their government for letting the Brits come in and perpetuate this picture and this visual? Moving on. William's private secretary, Jean-Christophe Gray, said that moving forward, the heir and his wife plan to do things the Cambridge way, which included abandoning the never complain, never explain motto, favored by his father and grandmother. Aides also shared details about William's own plans to modernize how he works when he succeeds his father as the Prince of Wales. From the outset, it was claimed that he would halve the estimated 137 staff that Charles employed to create a more effective and less formal team. It's not a criticism of how it was done in the past, a Kensington Palace aide told The Sun, which also reported that William wanted to rip up the Royal Institution's rulebook. But times are changing. Charles, however, finds this whole attitude to be disrespectful, and he says that William is out of order. The Duke of Cambridge screwed up, but he effectively leveraged the moment to tease the public that he would soon be able to bring change. As often envious of his own son's popularity and favored status in the institution as Prince Charles was, this was already a sensitive topic with him. So this breach in royal etiquette, which he has never spoken about directly with William, apparently left a mark.